Welcome to the ThePPod.
So welcome back to the ThePPod, the partnership podcast from the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. Now, when we think about children living with someone other than their birth families, we tend to think about foster care or adoption. However, there are many occasions where children may be living with others through different arrangements, which can sometimes be quite confusing for those who don't work in children's social care to understand what the various options are, how they differ, and what support is in place to support those children and the families that look after them. So, to hopefully demystify this important area of work, I'm pleased to be joined in the studio today by Donna Markham, team manager of the Kinship team within Children's Social Care, to answer some of the questions. So, Donna, welcome along.
Thank you for having me.
I'm just wondering, before we sort of get stuck into the subject, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your role and the team you manage?
Yeah. I'm a team manager for the Kinship team. I'm one of 3 team managers, and the Kinship team is quite a large team actually, and we're split into 4 areas. So we undertake the assessments for special guardians and for connected foster carers, and that means a foster carer who is actually somebody that is already known to the child. So it could be a relative or a teacher in school, where there's already that connection, and then they go on and become their foster carer. So we do those assessments. We also supervise connected people foster carers once they've been through to panel. We offer special guardianship support post-order, and that's the part of the Kinship team that I manage, the support area. And we also have private fostering sitting in that area, which I also manage.
Today, we're going to be sort of picking up on private fostering arrangements. So I'm just wondering, can you just start off kind of explaining to us about what is a private fostering arrangement, and how does the kind of safeguarding of privately fostered children differ from children in other types of care?
Yeah, so private fostering is really confusing because it's not fostering.
Right.
So the very name of it is really misleading. Private fostering is ultimately a private arrangement that's been made by the parents of a child and another person.
Right.
And it's where that other person is not their immediate family member. So if a child is staying with their grandparents, aunties, uncles, brothers, sisters, they don't need to let anybody know about that. That's sort of a private family arrangement that doesn't need to be shared. But as soon as we go outside of that immediate family, if we go to great grandparents, great aunties and uncles, cousins, next door neighbours, things like that, then it's private fostering. And like I say, it's a private arrangement that is made between those 2 people, that the child is going to stay there. So it's different from other types of arrangements in children's social care, because it does not have children's social care involved in its making. It's completely separate to us. So we're advised generally of it after it's happened, but we're not instrumental in making that the place where the child is living. We're not suggesting that is where the child should live. It's completely independent to us. It's not a court order. It's a private family arrangement.
Right. So it's a very, very informal situation. Like you say, it hasn't gone through any court processes, and presumably hasn't gone through any form of assessment to actually make sure that place is safe for that child to be.
No. So once the child has been there for 28 days, or if we know, or that the carers know that the child will be there for more than 28 days, there actually is a legal duty for the parent and the carer to notify children's social care that it's happened, because actually we do have a duty to do an assessment of it to make sure it's safe. So as soon as we receive a notification, we would go and visit the child within 5 days, and we would complete a private fostering assessment within 35 days. And within that, we would seek to undertake the DBSs. They're not always back in 35 days, but we certainly would have requested it. We would have met the family members that are living in the new home. We would have looked at the home to make sure that it's appropriate. We would be talking to the carers about checking their understanding of how they can meet that child's needs in terms of their health and well-being and safeguarding. And we would be talking to the parents and making sure that the parents have agreed this arrangement, and they are happy with it. So we would do all of that in our private fostering assessment.
Right. It's like you say, we just need to make sure those places are safe. And I'm sure many are. We just need to know, isn't it?
Well, exactly. And I think, yes, most children are safe, but we have to remember that for some children, they're not. And we remember Victoria Climbié when we're thinking about that, who was in a private fostering arrangement. And actually, it was Victoria's death in 2000 that led to the Lord Laming review and the subsequent report that had quite an impact on sort of the requirements and the legislation around private fostering, and really making it really important that we look and identify those arrangements, and say we work hard with our partners in education as well to try and help identify where those private arrangements have been made. But we also have quite a focus on sharing private fostering information. So we do some CPD sessions on private fostering that we do internally for Somerset, and we also have a workshop on the SSCP page as well that people can access, wider professionals can access that. So that is part of what came from the Lord Laming review, is our focus on promoting and identifying private fostering.
Because it's often quoted, I think, with Victoria Climbié, that she was living with her aunt or living with a great aunt. But actually, you're absolutely correct. She wasn't a blood relative at all. She
wasn't, but she was reported as being with her great aunt. And if she had have been her great aunt, it still would have been private fostering. But yes, no, she wasn't actually a relative.
So what are some of the main reasons why children might be privately fostered?
Well, it can happen for lots of reasons. And I'd say probably the main reason is where the children and parents have fallen out, and the child has left home and gone to stay with a family friend or wider family member, or the parents have asked them to look after them because things are difficult at home. So that's probably the main reason. It can happen for other reasons. Parents, who are going through separation, maybe they're arguing a lot, might identify that they want the child to be somewhere else for a period of time. We may have adults who are working in the UK from abroad and identify somewhere else for their children to stay while they're here. We have children who are sent here from abroad. They may be here for education, and we've had some children in boarding schools, and if they can't remain in the boarding school, which has happened for various reasons. I mean, COVID being a prime example, children couldn't get back home, schools were closing, so boarding children were going to host families that we then had to assess any in Somerset that were for private fostering. So it can happen, lots and lots of reasons. Children, we've had a family, parents that went abroad for medical treatment, and the child went into private fostering for 3 or 4 months while the parents were abroad. So lots of different reasons that it can happen.
I was just thinking when you were talking there about residential schools and COVID and having to assess potentially quite a large number of private fostering arrangements. And how many people do you have in the team that would carry out those assessments?
Well, generally, we have one. We have Sally Locke, who is the private fostering social worker for Somerset at this time. And unless she's on leave, she will undertake all of them. Because we have to see a child within 5 days, if she's on leave, then we have a couple of other people in the Kinship team that have done them before, that we would ask to go and do them. But generally, yeah, Sally has them all.
So it sounds like Sally had quite a busy time then at the start of the COVID period.
Yes, so we thought it was going to be really busy, and it was a bit of panic stations. But ultimately, a lot of those children that were in Somerset went over the border into other counties, and private fostering is reported to the local authority in which the private fostering home is. So our numbers did go up, but not to unmanageable levels.
I think that was probably a relief for Sally at that point in time.
Yes, it was.
So how many sort of children are we talking about on a national basis? How many children do we think are in private fostering arrangements, and then sort of locally in Somerset?
Well, the estimated number of children in private fostering arrangements is 10,000 in England. So I think when we consider the geographical area of Somerset in England, that is quite a large number, where I think we probably would be expecting around about 2,000 children. Actually, our numbers throughout a year average low 20s.
Right, wow.
And I think at this moment in time, we've got about 6 or 7. This isn't a Somerset problem. It's a national problem, and recognised that we know what the estimates are, and no local authority actually reports anywhere near the figures that we expect. And I think that part of that is the difficulty with people understanding that actually they have a legal duty to report it, because that legal duty is in the Children Act. But your average parent or adult wouldn't read the Children Act or know that they had a legal requirement in there. So it's really hard when we're promoting private fostering, because the legal title is private fostering, and as I said at the beginning, that's really misleading. So people hear fostering and think that's not me, and kind of switch off from it a bit. So it's a real challenge, actually, in trying to get that message through to the families that are actually looking after these children, to let them know that they need to report it. And also to let schools know that when they become aware of that change, that they also have a legal duty to report it.
So, yeah, because I picked up, you said estimated 10,000 nationally. And so really what we're saying is that we are estimating that as a figure, but in reality, we don't really know, because actually they're not being reported into the local authority for that assessment to take place.
Exactly. And I would say I have done some direct work with schools just in July, and they were kind of laughing and saying, well, we would have that number of privately fostered children that you've told us you have at the moment. We would have that just from our school. So that's one secondary school in Somerset. So that there are definitely a lot of privately fostered children that we're not aware of.
And like you say, I think often schools are in quite a unique position that they may have known the child for many years, they may know the family, they may know the sort of the community dynamics that are going on, to be able to sort of pick up on these things.
Exactly.
Brilliant. And can you discuss any sort of challenges or issues that private foster carers might face, and how some of those can be addressed?
Well, I guess private fostering arrangements work really, really well when there is a positive relationship with the birth parents and good communication. It can become a challenge when that communication ceases, when sometimes it does, or because it's a private arrangement, the birth family would normally pay some money to the private carers, where we'd say at least they should be paying child benefit money over to the carers. When financial elements change or don't come into being, the private family will sometimes seek for the local authority to be paying them as a foster carer, and that is something that we don't do and we can't do, because if we do that, we would be saying they're actually a foster carer, a mainstream foster carer, and they would have to undergo all of the things that mainstream foster carers do. And also that child isn't in care, so you can't have a child that's not in care with a foster carer. So we don't pay any financial element at all, but we would try to mediate a bit between parents and make a suggestion of what we might think is reasonable. But yeah, that tends to be a bit of a sticking area for some carers when they're struggling financially, and if the birth parents aren't giving them enough money to actually care for the child.
I'm just wondering, do you have situations where potentially the parents, the biological parents, don't want that arrangement to be taking place, but maybe we've got an older teenager who says, that's it, I've fallen out with mum and dad, I don't want to live with them anymore, I'm going to go and live with my boyfriend or girlfriend's parents. So the child or the young person is kind of making that choice against the kind of parents' wishes. I mean, where does that sort of stand in terms of kind of parental sort of responsibility? And
that's a really interesting question, and I guess we have some different answers as well depending on the age of the child. So what fundamentally has to be there for it to be a true private arrangement is that it's a private arrangement between the parents and the child. And when we're talking about a child, we are talking a child who is under the age of 16, unless they have a disability, in which case it's under the age of 18. So under the age of 16, and yes, as you said, you can very often have these fallouts with teenagers who are 14, 15, and that's really difficult. And the parents are saying, I don't agree with it, and I want them to come home. What we would be saying actually is, what are the parents doing to get the child to come home? What are they? Are they being proactive, or are they just saying, I want them to come home, but not doing anything? And if they're not doing anything, then we will look at the child's age, and we might say, this child is going to be 16 in 6 months' time. They can consent for themselves. The parent's not actually doing anything to get them home, so we will work with this as a private fostering arrangement. We had a really interesting case a couple of years back, actually, with a much younger child, where the birth parent was very, very cross and saying, I don't agree to this private fostering arrangement. And it kind of throws things up in the air a little bit as to, well, what do we do? But ultimately, if a parent's not actually removing that child, and they're not being proactive in doing anything to get the child back in their care, it is a private arrangement. They just don't want our involvement. But actually, we have a legal duty to check that. So when this happened a few years ago, we had to take a bit of legal advice on it as to what do we do, because nobody's checking that is okay, but the parent's really, really cross and doesn't want us to go there. And the legal advice was, well, if they don't want the child to be there, they have to go and pick the child up. And if they're not going to, you have to check the house is okay. So, yeah, there are... It's not black and white always. There are grey areas.
That's what I was thinking as you were talking, and I suppose some of that sort of grey area gets wider when we're looking at sort of age and capacity of the child. Maybe, if we're talking about a 4-year-old who says, "Right, that's it. I don't want to go and live with my mum and dad," and there would be an expectation that the parent would be very proactive going into that house, potentially taking that child out, contacting the police. Whereas perhaps when we're talking about a 15-year-old, sort of, it's a wide grey area, isn't it?
It's a wide area. And I think in the example I was talking about, I mean, the child was around about the age of 6 or 7, so a very young child. So that's really difficult then, isn't it? Because you want the parent to collect the child. The parent had made a private arrangement and the reason was valid, but just didn't want children's social care having a look, really. And I think a lot of that comes down to fear around children's social care and around having social workers' involvement. And certainly I think that's the feedback that we have had after we've done assessments and when we've worked with families for a long time, that they kind of say, "Oh, well, I'd never worry about having a social worker come again," because there's a lot of fear when you say you're a social worker and you're phoning from children's social care and you want to go. There is a lot of stuff that comes with that for people.
Yeah, I think quite often there's that perception that social workers focus their day on sort of kicking in front doors and removing children, get them into foster care. I have heard fairly frequently a sort of perception that social workers get a bonus every time a child goes into foster care, which I know nothing could be further from the truth. But like I say, there is quite a strongly held public belief that that's the main focus.
Yeah, and I think that television doesn't always help. I certainly have stopped watching soaps because and I guess that's the same for any professional when you see your professional represented, on the television, and it's not right. But actually, we have really good feedback from families, birth parents and carers and children that work with us in private fostering. Really, really good feedback and, appreciate our involvement. So, yeah, if anyone is particularly worried about that, I would hope to put their mind at ease that we're offering a service just to make sure that the child has somebody visiting them that can hear their voice and understand them, and we can signpost carers to lots of information that can be helpful for them.
And I think alongside that, often the word assessment can give people a lot of fear and a lot of worry about, I'm being assessed. But so could you talk to us about what the assessment process actually kind of entails?
Yes, so we have a standard assessment form. It's quite a quick assessment in comparison to other assessments that we might do for children. But it's looking at sort of the family makeup and how the family can meet the needs of the child. So how they can meet their medical needs, health needs, their educational needs, their safeguarding, promoting time with their family, all of those kind of things. We will look at the space the child has in the house, that they have privacy, that the child or the young person feels comfortable and confident to go to the carer about private matters if they need help, if they need items purchased for them, or if they need to go and see a doctor, that they feel that they can speak to the carer about that. So we make sure all of those things are in place. And it's really important that we do our safeguarding checks. So we do the DBS. We will look around the house and we will say, it might not be perfect. The child might be sharing a bedroom with another child, which in fostering we would say, well, that's not really ideal. But in this case, we would say, well, that's okay. But where do they get their privacy? How is there a lock on the toilet door and things like that. In rare cases, if we felt that that a home was not appropriate, we could say that those carers could not do any kind of fostering at all, private or otherwise, in that home. We can also say that the family is the adults in the family are not appropriate as carers, and we could prevent them, or we could prevent one person from caring. And that could be because information comes to us potentially through a DBS or another professional that makes us concerned that the carer may not be appropriate to be around young people. Or it could be as part of the assessment that we might think they don't demonstrate an awareness of how they can meet, for example, how they can meet the child's cultural needs. And we might suggest some training for them. And if they don't want to do that, then, we might say, well, you have wider needs. You're not supporting the child in their culture, or you're not supporting the child to maintain a good relationship with their birth parents. And actually, you're maybe making things a bit difficult, and it might not be appropriate for reasons like this. So all kinds of reasons, really, that we could potentially prevent, but it's very, very rare. I can only think of one, and I've been managing private fostering for about 3 or 4 years, and I can only think of one.
Yeah, that's good. And that was going to be my question, really, is kind of how often does that happen?
Yeah. I think we become aware of things that aren't perfect and aren't great, but we will work with the family and we will say, this isn't great, so let's have a think about how we can make things better. And we will work with them. We will offer training, or we will have one-to-one talk with them. We will always speak to the young person alone and make sure that they're feeling happy. We do, we've had young people come into Somerset from other private fostering placements that have been ended by other local authorities as not being appropriate. So, we need to really keep a check on this and make sure that the children are happy, they are having their needs met, they're being fed appropriately, they're accessing education as they should be, and accessing any clubs and things that they want to be accessing in line with the other children in that family, that they're kind of accessing the same kind of things. So I was just in that circumstance. I mean, what would happen if you assessed a family and you said, actually, this really is not appropriate for this child to be here? What happens with that? Well, our first step would be to speak to the birth parents and say that our assessment is that it is not appropriate, and we would ask them to identify somewhere else for that child to live if they can't return home. Normally the birth parent at that point will take responsibility for it. The child will either be collected and go home, or they will identify another family or friend that will take over the care. So that's what would normally happen. I think, if I recall, the one that we had came into Somerset quite a few years ago, the child was studying from abroad, and we hadn't been able to contact the birth parents. But there was an intermediary agency, like a host family agency, involved. And actually we did have to report that to the LADO, the local authority designated officer, that they hadn't shared information on a DBS. So we take that very, very seriously. We're very glad that we don't have to do that often. But if it does arise, we will make sure that the child is in a safe place to live, and we will report if we think that is necessary. And we also will send a legal letter to prevent them from fostering, or that home from fostering again, if we think that is necessary. And of course, they have rights to appeal that, but we would take it seriously. We would take those measures if we need to.
So we've got the assessment process. So just sort of tracking through it, really. I guess sort of looking at, first of all, the notification. So you notified that there is a private fostering arrangement taking place. Then we talked about the assessment side of things. Is that it then, or is there further support in place?
No, it's not it. And what I would say, before I forget, is when somebody notifies, we do have notification forms that are currently on the Fostering in Somerset webpage that you could pull off, but they are the easiest notification form in the world. So if there is a professional listening thinking, another form to fill in, it's just a few names and addresses really, and that is it. And you just email that over to us. So once we do the assessment, the first year that a child is in a private fostering assessment, we have a duty to visit them every 6 weeks. And every 6 weeks, we complete a new form. It's called a Regulation 8 form, but it is effectively a new assessment. It's ever so slightly bigger than the original assessment. So we continually check that it remains appropriate for the child. Now that sounds, it sounds like a really awful process, I suppose, if you're a carer. But what that looks like for them is that every 6 weeks, the social worker is going to come to your home. They're going to talk to the child alone, and then they're going to have a sit and a chat with you. And it really is a conversation about what's going well, what are the challenges, anything that's come up. And it's written up into the assessment. So it's not like they continually and forever feel that they're in assessment, because for them, it looks like, a visit 6 weekly where we're having a conversation with them and just checking in on how things are. After the first year, if the child is still there, we can move that to 12 weekly. If everything's going fine, then they would be 12 weekly visits. But our 6 weekly and our 12 weekly visits, they're minimums. So if things were not going so well, if they were feeling a bit tricky, we would offer to go more often. If there was a particular incident, we might go out and see the child. So yeah, we would be, quite involved. But it's not a difficult relationship with private fostering social workers and the carers. They normally welcome the opportunity to sit down and have a chat and be able to talk about how things are going.
And as part of that ongoing assessment process, if as part of that you identify actually, this family could require some extra support, or the family are asking for some extra support, what might that look like?
Well, it could be that that the child is, or the young person is behaving in a particular way, then they haven't experienced it with their own children. So let's take, for example, maybe the child is experiencing some mental health issues, or has maybe been self-harming and they've not experienced that before. Then we would talk to them about it. We would give them some guidelines for managing it, and we would offer them to undertake some training. So the offer of training was increased to include private foster carers back when I started managing the team back 3 or 4 years ago. So generally they wouldn't go on and have a look, but as part of conversations, we might say, oh, well, this training might be helpful for you. And then if they want to, they can just book onto it in the same way. We can get them a log on and they can just go and book on to what they want to. So that generally I'd say that the support is via us talking to them and giving them advice and guidance and signposting and the training. Sometimes we do have to offer some mediation. But sometimes that might be with the carer and the birth parent, but sometimes that's with the young person and the birth parent, because as much as we're saying that the home is appropriate and they can meet the child's needs, it's not the child's home. It's not where their parents are. And so our goal is to have the child return back home wherever possible and end the arrangement. So we will support the child. We will talk to the young person about the time that they've spent with birth parents and what it was like, what they need to feel more secure about it and spend more time at home. So we're always looking at those. Equally, if it's really clear that that young person is not going to go back home and they're really safe and settled in the private arrangement, we will talk to the carers about whether they might want to consider a child arrangement order or a special guardianship order to replace the private fostering arrangement, to give them some parental responsibility so that they can make some decisions. Again, we don't do that particularly often, but it's where it's really, really clear, and we've done lots of work, and we know that a return home is not likely to happen, that actually then we need to think about how can we secure a more permanent option for the young person to make them feel that this is their permanent home and that they're wanted here and they're going to be cared for, and not necessarily have a social worker involved in their life anymore, because, you know, it's not something that young people want to have. They don't want to have to talk to a social worker every month. So we will offer those options, and if they're options that the carer and the young person are happy with, and we talk to birth parents as well, and if everyone's happy, we would support them in achieving a higher order.
And in terms of financially, I'm guessing because it's not a formal arrangement, there's no sort of financial support directly. But if a family is sort of saying, actually, you know, we're looking after our friend's child, we're struggling financially, we don't think we can sustain this, is there any advice or guidance that can be provided around that?
Well, really, we would point to the Citizens Advice Bureau. We would also be checking that they are claiming benefits correctly and that they are claiming things like the universal credit for that child as well, and that they're receiving child benefit if the parents aren't handing over the equivalent amount of money of child benefit as a minimum, that they should be claiming for it in their own right. So, yeah, we can certainly signpost to make sure that they've got all of those things in place as they should have. We can try to mediate with parents around finances if necessary, if they've had difficulty doing it themselves.
I just wonder if anybody wants to find out more information about private fostering in Somerset, how can they do this?
Okay, so there is an area on the Fostering in Somerset webpage. And if they go onto there and then in types of fostering, they will find private fostering. Again, even though it's not really fostering, that's where it sits. It's very confusing. Private fostering, there will be a drop down and it will give them a bit of information about private fostering. They can also email privatefostering@somerset.gov.uk if they want to talk to us about anything in particular. If somebody thinks that they might have a private fostering family, they're not quite sure and they want to talk it through, you can either email us or you can contact us on Kinship duty number. And we will talk it through and see if we think it's private fostering.
Brilliant, thanks, Donna. And what I'll do, I'll pop in the description for today's podcast those links and that number for anybody wanting those.
Lovely,
brilliant. Thank you, Donna. Well, I'm just thinking, just at the end there, you sort of talked about special guardianships orders, child arrangement orders. That's probably a whole kettle of fish to get into. So I'm just wondering, would you be happy to come back and talk to us another time about those?
Yes, absolutely.
That'd be brilliant. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today, Donna. And I believe as well, is it Private Fostering Week this week?
Private Fostering Week, yes. So we will be prominent on social media. We will have stalls outside a few shopping centres that you can come and talk to us and have a chat and find out a bit more about it.
Brilliant. Get out there and tell people about it. And like I say, raise awareness more than anything else about what it is and about that like I said, that duty to notify, just to make sure those places are safe. And as you mentioned earlier, we're also running out the workshops through the SSCP for schools and other agencies.
Yeah, so we have, I think we're doing 4 a year through there. But I would say if a school wants to have a larger presentation to them, with a number of year heads, etc., we could do things directly, but we'd need it to be for a number of people. But yeah, we are very keen on promoting it the best that we can into schools.
Brilliant. Well, hopefully that this helps with that. So,
thank you.
Donna, thank you so much for your time today. And really look forward to you coming back to us and again and talking to us about special guardianships and other forms of care arrangements.
Thank you.
Lovely. Thanks, Donna. Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye. As always, if you'd like to find out more details on the topics discussed in today's episode, go to the SSCP website at somersetsafeguardingchildren.org.uk or by following any of the links in the description. If you have any questions or comments arising from today's episode, or would like to be involved in future episodes, we'd love you to get in touch with us at ThePPod@somerset.gov.uk. My thanks again to my guest today, Donna Markham, team leader in the Kinship team in Somerset Children's Social Care, for talking to us about private fostering arrangements. I'm pleased to say that Donna will be joining us again for another episode to talk about some of the other areas of work her team undertakes, and specifically about special guardianship orders. So if today's episode has left you wanting to find out more, Donna will be back with us again shortly. My thanks as well, of course, to you for listening. My name is Steve Maccabee, and I'm the training manager for the Somerset Safeguarding Children Partnership. And I look forward to you joining us again next time at ThePPod.
Let's work together to help keep children safe.